The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
I mean, it's Memorial Day, so we're going to have a little fun on today's podcast. We can allow us that. You'll indulge us a little bit of silliness on a holiday. Not I guess it doesn't really match up, Memorial Day and silliness, but it's a holiday. It is a holiday. We celebrate those that have been injured or lost their lives, I believe, in service. It was explained to me a long time ago that there are very distinct definitions. I usually go with the blanket, thank you for your service, which I think is always a safe play to make, but I know that it is more specific than that. So happy Memorial Day, everyone. Dan Besbris, Ethan Norof. It's Monday here on Fantasy NBA Today. And Ethan and I were having a conversation off air that had nothing to do with basketball. And I said, you know what? It's the off season. Ethan's just been traveling Southern California, going from supermarket to supermarket. And I still don't fully know why, but he now has Nectarines to feed all of our listeners.
And I couldn't be happier about it, might I add.
Good day to you, sir.
All good, man. Just got to scour the valley for the best produce deals with the summer upcoming here. Usher in the 2 different types of cherries, 4 different varieties of nectarines, including mango nectarines. So you want to know about fruit? I'm your man. And when it comes to the months of June, July, and August.
When do my pluots come out? That's my jam.
Oh, man. Well, we're probably another 2-3 weeks, I'm thinking.
Okay.
We saw some nice black apricots at the farmer's market today. That was a big improvement.
Oh, my God. You really did do 3 markets, huh?
Oh, 3 markets on a Sunday. You already know it.
You're so strange. I love you, man. Ethan Norof, everybody. We're talking Lakers today, but we're also talking supermarkets. Oh, there's a supermarket here in Southern California called John's, but they made their logo look the exact same as Vons, but with like a little break between this needless triangle at the left tip of the J. Why? Come on. Why is that triangle there if not to fool us?
I think it's, definitely for brand familiarity and to get you to come in thinking it might be something that it's not. But once you're inside, you find out that this week they got Rainier cherries, 2 pounds for $5. It's hard to walk out.
What's happening on this podcast right now?
It's hard to walk out on that deal. So that's just one of the premier items. So if you do meander on down there, tell them Ethan sent you. They'll hook you up. Trust me.
Oh man, this podcast, by the way, is brought to you by Hawaiian Owl's Kona Coffee Company. Not cherries, although feel free to go have some of those as well. They sound delicious. I do like fruit. It's a sweet and delightful treat. I'm sure everybody's having their Memorial Day cookouts or barbecues or whatever they got going on, burgers and dogs and. Hey, I got one other food question for you before we start dabbling in, because it's Lakers Day too, so things are going to get real weird on today's podcast.
Oh yeah, we're gonna grill.
Yeah, we have thoughts. Have you tried any of this the Impossible meats yet?
I have not.
Yeah, neither have I. I've heard that they're kind of amazing, and then I read about them, and they broke it down to like a molecular level, and this is like heresy for me because. Meat and protein products are basically the only things that my body can digest besides like synthetic Pop-Tarts and things of that nature. I think I got to try it. And I only asked about it because of all these things that could get cooked on Memorial Day, and that may be considered sacrilege right now. But anyway, at Dan Besbris, at Ethan_. I'm going to finally get this right? Ethan _Norof, Norof.
Oh, you got it.
Yeah. See, it took me a couple of weeks, but I got to remember who's got the underscore, because like Brandon on Wednesdays, he's got an underscore on his Instagram, but not on his Twitter. You guys are just screwing with me, keeping me on my toes in the off season.
It's just I wanted the Norof to stand out even more than it already does. There's such a small tribe of us in the world that I felt like by separating it out with that underscore, I really made my point of emphasis clear.
Yeah. I probably should have dropped one in for Besbris too to separate me from the other Besbrises. By the way, if anybody out there has met a Besbris, they're my cousin because they're an equally small number. Ethan and I are going to go on a walk across the country just searching for all of our family members, and we're going to come back with 16 of them total.
And 16 different types of nectarines, might I add.
I'm expecting them. By the way, we're both Southern California, so I could probably just drop by Ethan's place and have a nectarine one of these days. Let's talk Lakers. Let's talk fantasy. Let's talk reality. It was brought to my attention, and I think the criticism was a little bit heavy-handed, but also constructive in a way. And we do get a little, not you and I in particular, but just all of us here on Fantasy NBA Today, Myself, obviously, I'm the greatest contributor because I'm on it 3 times a week right now. But sometimes we get carried away in the reality side of things a little bit. And it is more of a fantasy show. So when we're talking about how players did and what we're expecting towards the future, there's a little bit of a pie in the sky thing. Like, what if he ends up here? What if he ends up there? There's not, you and I are looking at pages with salaries and salary cap stuff, but this is not our area of expertise. So if we say something like, oh, what if this team brings somebody back, and it's not something that's probably in their plans, you'll have to cut us a little bit of slack on that, because our goal here is to talk about fantasy value, underrated, overrated, and a lot of this stuff can be re-broken down after July 1st. So certainly do appreciate all feedback. I appreciate folks that take the time to write it up and make it well thought out, and we're always going to take that stuff in hand. And so I'll say it like I always do. If you want to drop us a nice rating on iTunes or whoever, we love it. If you have thoughts on how we can improve the show, you can always lay that on me. I'm never going to be offended by that stuff as long as nothing personal is in there. And we're going to take everything kind of under advisement. And, I've, with the exception here of Nectarine Monday, I've tried to do a good job of kind of keeping things on point during the season in particular. I know everybody has a lot of things to get to. But in the offseason, we're going to screw around a little bit from time to time. So that's the other half of that one. Lakers, I think, Ethan, between the two of us, we have a pretty good handle on not only the fantasy side, but also the reality, the numbers side of this team. We're both Southern Californians. We've both been around it. I hosted a Lakers pod for a while. That's gone on a little bit of a hiatus. We can't start talking about the Lakers season in review without talking about Magic Johnson to start the whole thing. It's been weird, is the kindest way I can put it, over the last month and a half.
Yeah, I would say that's awfully kind. I would say it's been almost like a little bit of sabotage going on. If you looking from Magic Johnson's perspective, and the Lakers, I think, are operating under this theory that the less that they say, the better it will look. But right now, I think everybody's kind of looking at Rob Pelinka and really at Jeannie Buss to step up and say something worth something.
They have said very little. I felt kind of bad for Frank Vogel at his introductory press conference because as boring and bland as he is, he actually seemed okay at that conference. He said the right things. He, talking about holding guys accountable. He had his right talking points, so that's good. But I don't know. It hurts me to say that Magic has gone out there and he's sort of forcing people to pick sides when all Laker fans really want to do is see a team that does things right and wins. Isn't the best thing they can do between today and July 1st to just almost say nothing at this point? Like, it's become such a mess. Just get out of the way and let things mellow a little bit?
I think at this point, probably, but I think that the franchise and specifically Jeannie Buss could have been a little bit more proactive in getting out in front of the story before it became a story. I mean, if they came out and initiated a conversation or even some type of narrative as to Magic's exit once that kind of surprised everybody and the regular season was still in firm focus, I think they could have taken more of a control of the conversation than they have to date. Yeah. The reality is they've let sort of the media fill in the gaps, and Magic Johnson has continued to talk. And, silence creates a lot of unanswered questions. And the longer that those linger, the more people create their own realities, whether they're true or not.
You are absolutely right. It should have been done. And I think it sounds like you and I agree. Maybe it's just too late now. Like, can they go back and try to fix it? I feel like they would just dig themselves a deeper hole.
I think now that Frank Vogel's, clearly the hired man as head coach, and Jason Kidd's in tow, and they've got the 4th overall pick, I think you got to look forward toward the draft and, decide what you're going to do with that pick, whether it's going to be part of a trade package or whether you're going to make the selection and, try to actually build something with these young kids. But it's really kind of hard to believe with LeBron on a very firm timeline here.
You're a man who understands how narratives work, Ethan. Should they talk about the whole Jason Kidd coming in like right behind Frank Vogel thing, or is that another topic they should probably just dodge at this point? Because certainly the media, the talking heads, the Stephen A's, the whoever, they're already saying Jason Kidd's going to be head coach by this time next year. That's a bad storyline.
Well, I feel bad that Frank Vogel had to really clarify that, he's not going to be looking over his shoulder at his introductory press conference, right? It certainly sets the tone for a certain dynamic. That being said, look, I mean, I understand why you would want an ex-player on the staff, but, Jason Kidd carries a bigger profile than just an ex-player, Hall of Fame talent, twice head coach in other cities with other teams. And so, yeah, it creates a little bit of looking over the shoulder dynamic, for lack of a better way to say it. And I think it's just interesting that, that they being the Lakers were so impressed by his interview as head coaching candidate when they first brought him in, that they didn't want to hire him as head coach, but they felt so important that he was an assistant on anyone's staff, whether it was going to be Ty Lue's staff and now on Frank Vogel. So I just think it's a really interesting situation. And, it feels like he's sort of a pipeline to the front office. But if Jason Kidd becomes the biggest story of this team, I think the Lakers are going to be happy because that means their play on the court is going to look good, ?
Yeah, question mark is right. We will get to who they may or may not be able to bring in from this team. I'm going to start today's more team-situated breakdown because, frankly, I don't know enough about Frank Vogel's schemes, and apparently they were changing pretty considerably between Indiana and Orlando. And I think what I had read is that last year, during his kind of sabbatical, he called it, during his introductory press conference, he basically just went from team to team studying modern NBA offenses to sort of update his resume a little bit. So, I don't know enough about that type of X's and O's to dig into it. But what I will say is that from a contractual standpoint, the Lakers have a lot of flexibility. They have LeBron James, Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Mo Wagner, Kyle Kuzma, Josh Hart, and Isaac Bonga on contract for this coming year as of this moment. They have opportunities to sign guys like Alex Caruso if they want to, and he's a guy that I think they probably should, although we haven't gotten to that part of the story on today's podcast yet. But then you've got all these veterans they signed to that one-year deal last season. KCP, Rondo, Muscala, who they traded for, finishing up a 2-year deal. Lance Stevenson. I think Reggie Bullock is a restricted free agent, but I'm not positive on that.
Unrestricted for Bullock.
Unrestricted. Okay, thank you. JaVale McGee, he's off the books. Tyson Chandler is off the books. They're obviously going to be making a run at stuff. How do we start sort of building this thing up? You know what? I'm even getting ahead of myself, Ethan. Make me slow down here. From a season gone by, they had all these one-year deals that were basically unilaterally panned, even at the time they did it. But, I mean, I would have argued that a year ago, they weren't really trying to win last season. That was like the in-between year. It didn't go as... I think they would have liked to see more than they did, but I don't think they were ever trying to win a championship this last season. And so I almost forgave them the idiotic signings. For me, this offseason is sort of the last chance.
Yeah, well, I think that, the Lakers need to be done with renting out their cap space, right? That's kind of the phrase that we've heard associated with them over the last couple of years. And, they really can't do that again with LeBron's second year now here and very present. If you look at the combined salaries of last year of Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Rajon Rondo, and Lance Stevenson, you're talking about nearly $26 million. I mean, that's a significant number, especially on a team that's been looking to pair a second star alongside LeBron James. So, the other thing, in addition to LeBron just simply getting older and simply in the second year of his deal, and what could be a 3-year deal, I know it's talked about a lot as a 4-year deal, but it's really a 3-year deal. If LeBron wants to walk away from that $41 million in 2021, I don't think he'll have a problem doing so. It certainly won't be financially motivated. He's made plenty of money and will continue to make plenty of money. So this is really the middle year of a 3-year deal. And I think if you're the Lakers, you have to think about, look, after this upcoming year, so after 2019-20, Brandon Ingram is going to be a restricted free agent. The year after that, Kyle Kuzma and Lonzo Ball face the same fate. So really this year has to be about how you want to structure this team moving forward, because if you bring in a guy like an Anthony Davis or Bradley Beal via trade and or sign a premier free agent, you're looking at a very different roster than the one we're sitting here dissecting today.
Yeah, and that's what makes this so tough. This is a team that's in some serious flux just in terms of who's actually going to be there to start this coming season. So we'll try to break things down in terms of what happened this last year. Obviously, LeBron missed a ton of time. First really serious injury of his entire career. He's a bionic man until Christmas Day of 2018. From a fantasy standpoint, he finished as the number 19 guy by averages in 9-cap, but 67 by totals. Is there a universe where LeBron James could actually be slightly underrated in fantasy? I'm inclined to think that his giant name sort of balances out with the slight disappointment of this last year.
Well, I think that there could be a slight underrating of LeBron, especially if the Lakers are successful in bringing in not one but two big names to play alongside him. But at the same time, it is still LeBron James. It's hard for me to believe he's suddenly going to become the 20th guy off the board or something along those lines.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I don't. There's too much name power there. Other guys that are going to be back with the Lakers, barring a trade. Obviously, there's so many things that can still happen. Lonzo Ball. he polarizing name in fantasy sports in reality.
I would say so in both spheres, right?
Yeah. So what do we make of this kid? I actually really love his fantasy game, but the percentages are such a massive drag. You really only need to see improvement in one of them for him to be a solid fantasy contributor, but so far it hasn't happened.
Yeah, and for me, it's just as long as LeBron James is on this roster, I hear all the narratives about, LeBron and Lonzo playing together and they can complement each other's skill set. But the reality is Lonzo still can't shoot the ball. He's not a reliable shooter, especially from distance. He did have some success from there, but it was limited and it was often streaky. And that's not the type of player that traditionally has given LeBron James the most amount of success when constructing a roster around him. So I personally really find it difficult to think that Lonzo Ball is going to go into the next season on the Lakers roster, especially with how much smoke has been around Kyrie Irving potentially enjoying a reunion with LeBron James recently.
All right, well, we'll get to that discussion here momentarily. We're going to shelve the which free agents do we think the Lakers are coming up with. The one thing that gives me some measure of hope with Lonzo Ball, and I'm not a guy who's going to be drafting him at any point where someone else probably will, is that he does do those other things. Steals. His blocks were down this year, but he blocks shots from the point guard spot, rebounds, passes. He's shooting the three a bit more, although, again, drag on the field goal percent, which gives you this... if he had the court opened up to him in some way, if he could stay healthy, if there wasn't LeBron around, if he got moved to another team, this is a guy who has an intensely high fantasy ceiling, but he's so far from it, which leads me to the question, as with a lot of Lakers and a lot of players with big names, which somehow Lonzo Ball has after two fairly unsuccessful seasons in the NBA, is there a universe where he falls far enough for you or or anyone here at Hoop Ball to draft him next year?
Is there a universe? Sure. Do I want to explore that universe? I'm not really sold on that. I think for me, the reality is his upside. I read this great piece of analysis the other day, and it was actually related to fantasy baseball. And without getting into all the details, it basically said most of his fantasy upside, the player that was being dissected in this little blurb, most of his fantasy upside remains theoretical. And that is exactly how I feel about Lonzo Ball.
So he's basically a no. That's what you're saying.
No, he's going to be a pass for me because I think, like you said before, the price in which you're going to have to pay to acquire him, and some of that based on his name value alone and the fact that he does play for the Lakers, it does make him more recognizable. I think that is going to inflate his price in the same way that Luka Doncic will have an inflated price, and the reason I won't have either of those guys on my rosters next year.
Yeah, does that extend to Brandon Ingram as well? He's another guy who's got big name, and the fantasy hasn't come along quite yet.
Well, you're also talking to a guy who drafted Brandon Ingram as a top 50 asset last year, so that is a player that's a little bit different for me. Okay. Coming off the injury, it's a little scary just because of the seriousness of that injury, and I think, given what the Lakers construct can look like in the fall, it's going to impact Ingram. But if Ingram's on another roster, say like in New Orleans, then maybe he's a guy I reach for even more aggressively given that circumstance.
He had a pretty impressive stretch before he went down, and that's the thing that I think is worth pointing at. He's a guy that I generally avoided last year. He was one that you and I sort of went different directions on, and for most of the year, he was a guy that was basically underperforming. The free throw percentage was hurting. He doesn't do a ton in the defensive stuff. And then for a couple weeks right before his season ended, he was going crazy. 27, 29, 32, 23, 31, 25 every night. And he's shooting 55, 58, 62, 67% from the field. I think he knocked down something like 9 threes over those 6 games. So that was coming along.
He was even making free throws. He was the efficiency king, looking aggressive. He was everything that everybody had been waiting for to see. They were seeing it from Ingram.
So does you have some measure of confidence that could continue in a non-LeBron scenario? What about if he's still with the Lakers?
I think it can continue in either scenario. I think it may be I'm opposite in this regard. I think a lot of people think that if he is traded to a team, whether it's New Orleans or anywhere else, it might unleash him even more. But I think if Brandon Ingram goes to a team where he's the focal point, it might actually slow him down, at least temporarily. You got to remember that he's 21? He's not even going to be 22 until September. He is still so young.
It's crazy.
And he's got so much in front of him. So for me, if he remains on the Lakers and the Lakers are able to pair LeBron with that second guy but keep Ingram in the fold, I think it would really actually enhance his appeal because, yes, he won't be the first or even second option necessarily, but the guys who are going to guard him and the competition he's going to face and some of the matchups he can exploit, I think will give him even more confidence than he had to prematurely end last season.
I'm a little worried he could suffer from some of the same syndrome we talked about with LeBron and Lonzo, just the Lakers name, if he's still on that franchise, where folks might take him earlier than I'd want to, where for me, Ethan, last year I sort of just didn't want to touch almost any Laker, even LeBron, for basically that same reason. I just didn't think they were going to fall far enough. This year with Ingram, it's a little bit more iffy for me, I guess, which is a step in the right direction, because last year was like, look, I haven't seen anything to make me think he can get over that hump yet. This last season, he started to show it for more than one game at a time. It was 6-7 games in a row, and you're thinking, well, can this stick? Can this top 100, top 90 guy stick? Can he add a blocked shot to his game? Could he get a steal? That's the type of stuff that feels like it could push him into the top 60, top 70 range.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely about the defensive contributions, and I think the steadiness elsewhere. Even if he can tick up the threes to over 2-point game or 2.0 per game, then I think he's going to be trending in the right direction because, look, it was only 6 games after the All-Star break before he took his exit, but in those 6 games, he averaged 28 points, 7.5 boards, 1.5 threes, and he shot 57% from the floor, including 52.9 from deep. And I'm not saying that number is going to stick around because I think he's going to take more threes as he grows into more confidence with that. But at the same time, those are extraordinary numbers for someone of his age and experience level.
Yep, top 50 guy in those 6 games. Question is, can it stick and can he fall? These Lakers, they just don't fall in fantasy leagues. There's always one or two crazy Laker fans in every fantasy league that are scooping up these guys 2 rounds too early for me, and it's crushing because as a Laker fan, I know I'm not going to draft them that early, and then I never end up with them. Although last year I did end up with a couple of JaVale McGee's, and I felt pretty good about that because he actually ended the year as the second highest ranked Laker on the season. Can you even imagine? Could any of us have predicted that coming into the year? JaVale McGee, by the way, finished as the number 56 player in 9 category leagues on a per-game basis. 45, by the way, by totals. He played 75 games this year. Averaged 22 minutes a game. He's obviously a free agent right now, but I got to think he bought himself an okay contract.
I mean, I think he's got to sign for more than the minimum, right?
You'd think so. Averaged 12, 7.5, 0.6 steals, 2 blocks a game. He shot 62% from the field. I'm not an expert on the salary cap. Any way the Lakers could possibly bring him back, I got to think they're looking for a center that can shoot a little bit more.
That's where I'm at with it. I mean, sure, there's a scenario in which they can bring him back, but I don't see it happening just because I think the fit of the overall roster needs to be improved and really geared towards shooting. We saw that it did not work when they went another direction this year.
Is there a place that'll give JaVale McGee 22 minutes a game besides the crazy Lakers this year?
Yeah, I think there's a role for him between 20 and 25 minutes. I mean, I really wouldn't be surprised if he, flirted with the idea of going back to the Warriors. Kevon Looney is going to be an expensive commodity, and that's going to be a real test for them if they're able to keep him or not.
What about Kyle Kuzma? Say going back to guys that are actually, barring a trade, again, I have to throw that disclaimer in there, going to be with the Lakers this coming season. He's only set to make $2 million this year. Kuzma, third highest ranked Laker, at number 121 in 9-cat. He suffered from some of those same deficiencies. Not a ton of defensive stats. Averaged 19.5 with almost 3 assists, 2 3-pointers. I don't know why he can't shoot free throws all that well. I mean, he's okay, 75%, but not great. He's got a pretty good touch. Is he a guy that can take a step forward this coming year? I'm actually, by the way, without, I haven't given my opinion on a ton of these guys first. I'm a little bit more bullish on Kyle Kuzma than I am on the other guys. He's a guy that seems like he should be able to fix his shot.
Well, I hear you, but I spent a lot of last year talking about why I was kind of less impressed with Kyle Kuzma than I was with Brandon Ingram. And even when Brandon Ingram was quote unquote struggling or not having the consistency in which some people demanded from him, I just didn't see what I thought I would from Kyle Kuzma. Look, he's definitely a talented player. We know he can score the basketball, but I'm still asking myself the question of what else can he really do? Because he's going to have moments where he can flash this or show that. But beyond scoring the basketball, I mean, the Lakers don't really need more scorers, especially if you're talking about bringing in one or two more guys capable of scoring the basketball. They need guys who are capable of doing those other things. And, that's something we really haven't seen from Kuzma. And my concern last year was specifically the three-point shot. He took a big step back from behind the three-point line, and he kind of turned into more of a volume shooter. I mean, he took 6 threes a game last year. It's almost, it's about 40% of his field goal attempts, and he only shot 30.3% overall. That's going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, his 2-point efficiency was actually pretty good last year. He just couldn't shoot.
Yeah. And so for me, if I'm looking to evaluate Kuzma, I see that, last year he made 128 threes total in 70 games. So, just shy of 2 a game, like we said. And in a league that emphasizes threes, that's not enough to stand out. He's, not really making a dent in steals, not making a dent at all in blocks. I mean, the rebounds, he had 100 fewer rebounds in his sophomore year than he did in his rookie year. So what really stands out to me besides points is not a whole lot. So for me right now, Kyle Kuzma is more attractive actually in a points league than he is in any head-to-head format or even a rotisserie one.
Yeah, the hope there, if you're going that direction, is that he can get his field goal percent up from 45.5 to something like 47, the free throw percent up closer to 80. I don't know if that's happening. I don't think he's ever a guy, Ethan, that kicks it up in the defensive stats. That's just not – I don't think that's in his DNA. And as a guy who's playing a lot of 4 and even some 5s, those were not fun days for Kuzma for the Lakers.
No, they were not.
He's not blocking shots either. So it's going to have to come from efficiency if indeed his value is going to be on the rise. But I think, listen, we talk about all this stuff. You roll it all together. The one thing that really stands out is that, again, the Lakers only had 2 guys inside the top 120 this year, and it was LeBron and JaVale McGee. How did these other... And now there's the prospect that, yes, obviously, KCP, who was playing 25 minutes a game, and Rondo, good Lord, playing 30 minutes a game. Reggie Bullock played about 30 minutes a game in his time. Josh Hart, who played hurt for the better part of the year. Yes, okay, there are various minutes that are going to be changing. Some of those guys probably from whatever it was to 0. But if the Lakers bring in a max free agent, that guy's going to take a massive chunk out of whatever these scoring heavy players and can try to do. It's why, by the way, I loop back to, okay, well, the only one of these guys that, to me, could still sneak into value is Lonzo Ball, because he doesn't actually need to score to be successful. I'm trying to find those guys that don't actually need to take shots, because, what if Kyrie comes in? What if Jimmy Butler comes in? Lonzo's not going to take any shots in that offense, and maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think that's the reality is, is so much people want to talk about what the Lakers are going to look like, but there is so much, there are so many variables on the table and so many directions and paths in which this team can take. And, until we at the end of the day, if you're the Lakers, one thing that you cannot have as the outcome of this offseason is another summer where you rent out cap space. That cannot be the outcome. So I understand that you never want to make a move or make a series of moves out of immediacy or because you feel like you have to. But at this point, you've exercised the optionality over the last couple of seasons at least. It hasn't worked out in your desired direction. And you're still at a point now where, yes, you have LeBron James on the roster, but now there's a value to the now. There's a value to the present that really hasn't been there prior. And then I don't think the Lakers can go into next season and say, look, we're going to build a team that can compete with the Warriors, can compete with the Rockets, can compete with the rest of the Western Conference in terms of a championship. But I think they have to go in thinking we're going to build a really competitive team led by LeBron James and whomever else. And, we're going to give teams a really scrappy effort on most nights. And who knows what could happen 4 times in a 7-game set. And I think that's the mindset that they have to adopt. And whether that means trading for Bradley Beal or trading for Anthony Davis or signing a free agent and then trying to explore the trade market, one thing that cannot happen is the renting out of cap space, because it's just going to put everybody in a tough direction. And, Frank Vogel said it as tough position, I should say. And Frank Vogel said it as introductory press conference that this entire organization, not just the players and the coaches, but the front office, the sales staff, everybody involved needs to be pulling in one direction. And I think this is the offseason in which that really needs to start happening because it hasn't happened to date.
A lot of last chance situations going on here for this Lakers front office. You got to get it right early July, or you're going to have a lot of very upset folks. Quickly here, Ethan, and then I want to talk to you about the finals briefly before we wrap up the show. Of LeBron and the Lakers' young core, are any of these guys... I mean, there's every reason, by the way, every logical reason to think that these guys would be underrated in fantasy going into next year. LeBron had a down year. Lonzo had a bad year. Brandon Ingram was good at the very, very end. So maybe you could argue he doesn't have the logical reason. Josh Hart was hurt. Kuzma didn't shoot that well. On paper, all of these guys have a pretty obvious reason to be underrated. And yet in practice, I'm not sure any of them is going to be underrated except maybe Josh Hart. So, are you going to end up with any Lakers on your fantasy team next year?
I mean, like I did last year. I'll make sure LeBron doesn't slide too hard. I'll have Ingram in my queue and be ready to pick him if the opportunity presents itself. But outside of that, it's tough to say that anybody who we know for sure is going to be on the roster is also going to be on one of my fantasy rosters.
Yep, that's not that dissimilar from my own set. It's hard. I'm a pragmatic Laker fan who ends up with very few of them on my fantasy team. The Raptors, Ethan, 4 wins in a row against the Bucks. They clamped down. Their team defense was just amazing after getting crushed in Game 2. The Bucks really didn't make any adjustments for 4 straight games, and not surprisingly, they ended up losing. Everybody's talking about Kawhi Leonard. I've been more impressed with Toronto's ability to just stop the whole Bucks offense in its tracks. Can they do that to the Warriors, though?
I mean, the Warriors are a whole different team, a whole different attack, and a whole different talent level when you're talking about how that team is constructed. Oh, and by the way, they're about to get back DeMarcus Cousins and Kevin Durant, just by the way. So, there's certainly a lot bigger of a task. I think a taller of a task, no pun intended, with how long the Bucks are with the Warriors in front of them than they just finished off. But look, this Raptors team plays together. They played a level of defense we really haven't seen from any team that in the postseason to date. And they seem to be getting contributions from guys like Kyle Lowry has been more consistent for them, and Fred VanVleet has provided a spark off the bench, and Serge Ibaka has proven that he actually has a pulse, and Marcus Gasol has come through in moments where the Raptors have needed him. So as good as Kawhi Leonard and Pascal Siakam, as good as Kawhi Leonard has been, and as good as Pascal Siakam can be, and whatever the expectations are on Lowry as well, it's for me going to be about that supporting cast on the Raptors and what they can do to surprise people, because that's what it's going to take in order for the Raptors to really have a chance.
I'm seeing the Warriors at a minus 280 series price right now. Raptors plus 230 is, I don't know, this is, I think, assuming that Boogie is playing and KD is not in Game 1, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm not 100% certain on that. Do you see any value in looking at the underdog in this thing? Toronto does have home court, but damn, they are still the Warriors.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, if you're talking about small wagers, sure. If you're talking about life-changing wagers, it's probably a little bit outside my comfort zone.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, last one for you. We'll go Lakers hot seat here to end the pod. This will be our
I like it.
I'll be our hot take to end the show. Maybe we can take this over into the Twitter sphere. If you had to guess, and I think you gave us a little bit of an indication earlier in the show.
Okay.
Big free agent. Do the Lakers get one? And if so, who do you think it is?
I do think the Lakers are going to sign a big free agent. And I do think it will either be Kyrie Irving or Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, I've heard some Jimmy Butler stuff as well. Do you think they get a center, like a Boogie or a Vooch?
Vooch is a really interesting fit. I mean, at least in theory, right? Because he's the type of player who should be able to fit into that offense quite well. I don't know if the Lakers are going to want to pay him what he's going to command. And as for Cousins, Cousins is going to have an interesting market. Look, if DeMarcus comes back in the NBA Finals and he looks like any semblance of the DeMarcus Cousins that even we saw this year, he'll have no problem getting a deal that's above what he got this past one to join the Warriors. But if he looks like he's struggling and his mobility is compromised and there are questions, even in the event the Warriors win the finals, I don't know what kind of deal he's going to wind up taking. So I think the Lakers will be in the center market. But if you're looking for a big man, I think that's more likely to come via trade than it is in free agency.
I'm starting to build this weird Lakers roster in my mind where they give Vooch like a near max and they trade for Bradley Beal. And then you actually have that's not a bad trio, right? Beal,
in a weird way, I know we've been talking so much about the theoretical star and who's going to come next to LeBron and this and that, but I've been thinking a lot about Bradley Beal. We kind of mentioned him last week in last week's episode. We kind of went down that way a little bit, and I've been thinking a lot about Bradley Beal and the fit with the Lakers. And at a certain point in life, I tell my students this all the time, you got to make a decision. You got to be okay with making that decision, even if something, quote unquote, better might present itself later on. And so I really like the idea of trading for Bradley Beal. I've grown to like it quite a bit, as a matter of fact.
I have too. The 48% shooting that he's turned himself into over the last 2 or 3 years, that's the kind of efficiency that you need around LeBron James. Someone who can just go get a bucket.
Yeah, and if you could put together a trade package that involves Lonzo Ball and Kyle Kuzma, and there is some way somehow you can keep Brandon Ingram in the fold and get Bradley Beal on this Lakers roster, I really think, at a certain point, the Lakers need to decide how to build a team and not just build a team of stars and try to fill in the rest, if that makes sense.
And then you get into the stuff that I don't understand as well, like mid-level exceptions and veteran minimums and where that actually comes in with the salary cap. I do know that if you trade for a guy, you have to send out, I think it's within like 20% of what you get back. And so there are opportunities to do things like sign and trade and still get another max free agent on the books. But again, that's sort of where my knowledge caps out. Ethan, final thoughts on Lakerdom before we put a pin in it. Nowhere to go but up, right? Can they screw it up any more than they have to this point?
Well, I don't know that, they can screw it up more than they have. At least I don't think you're going to see an offseason like last year where they signed a bunch of what looked like ill-fitting parts. But I do think the Lakers are under the clock. And, I think this front office needs to decide what the direction is going to be. Look, Lonzo Ball, Magic Johnson is no longer a part of the front office, no matter what he says publicly. And I'm very curious to see what happens with Lonzo Ball, because that felt more like a Magic Johnson pick than it did a Rob Pelinka pick, right? And so as a result of that, I feel like his name could be bandied about in trade rumors a little bit heavier than we've come to expect. And honestly, look, the Lakers, I really do think that they're flirting with the idea of that Kyrie Irving, LeBron James reunion. I'm not saying it's guaranteed or it's even likely, but I think the idea certainly exists. And, if you could enter into a scenario where Kyrie Irving is your new point guard, Bradley Beal is your new shooting guard, and, LeBron James is healthy and ready to run, it's interesting, if nothing else, right?
The one thing I heard, by the way, there was that weird little rumor that got kicked around a couple months ago that Magic wanted De'Aaron Fox, and one of the buses, I think, may have... I don't know the validity of it. I mean, that's the thing. There were so many leaks, too. It's a deep sigh. The Lakers are a deep sigh for me at this point, but they got a shot. They got a shot. Next week, by the way, Ethan, you and I, we were just talking about Vooch. It's a good segue. Next week on Monday, you and I have the Orlando Magic.
Excellent. What to do with Aaron Gordon? That's a big question for Orlando this summer.
Massive, massive question. Over the rest of this week, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow with Neil Rochelani, we'll talk NBA Finals betting and also break down the Miami Heat, one of the always most exciting rosters in fantasy NBA. The Sacramento Kings on Wednesday. I believe Brandon Marcus will be back from Italy for that show. Neil is stuck with the Hornets on Thursday. That's a team that could look real different if Kemba Walker's not back. And then the ever-exciting Detroit Pistons. That's Adrian and Coach on Friday of this week here on Fantasy NBA Today. Once again, a big, big thank you to Hawaiian Isles Kona Coffee Company. HawaiianIsles.com is the website, at HI Kona Coffee on Twitter. He is Ethan_Norof, Norof on Twitter. I am at Dan Besbris. Have a wonderful Monday, everybody. This is Fantasy NBA Today. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.